introduce the rest of our alumni panelists who are participating in the Innovations in Healthcare panel. First one who will be moderating, Mandy Mallott, Columbus Academy class of 2003, is the director of the Ohio State Early Investor Network at The Ohio State University. In this role, she facilitates connections between startup companies and prospective investors within Ohio State's community and advances the university's entrepreneurial mission of making meaningful connections and forming mutually beneficial relationships that positively impact society by advancing innovation, accessing talent, and driving economic success. Prior to this role, she served in several capacities related to business development, economic development, and international trade enforcement for the City of Columbus Department of Development, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the U.S. Trade Representative, respectively. Mandy graduated from The Ohio State University with a J.D. and a Master's in Public Policy and Management, as well as a BA in English and Political Science from Case Western Reserve University. She is also, as she mentioned, the partisan-elect of the Columbus Academy Alumni Board and the assistant varsity swim coach.
Sammy is an incredibly accomplished alum. He is a healthcare entrepreneur, physician, and private equity investor based in Paris, France. As a founding partner of Luxera Capital Partners, he deploys capital into commercial stage health technology businesses. Luxera was founded in 2020 and has bases in both Paris, France, and San Francisco, California. He also co-founded Allurion Technologies, which is a global leader in weight loss technology. In an effort to combat world obesity, Sammy co-created the Allurion Balloon, which is the world's first weight loss product that does not routinely require surgery, endoscopy, or anesthesia for placement or removal. Along with his partners at Allurion, Sammy has built a fully integrated global medical device company from the idea stage through commercialization and has benefited over 120,000 patients in more than 30 countries. After Sammy graduated from Columbus Academy, he attended Yale and was a Fulbright Scholar to France. He graduated summa cum laude with a BS in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. Sammy started his career as a member of McKinsey & Company's New York office and pharmaceutical and medical products practice before deciding to attend Harvard Medical School. It was during medical school that he founded Allurion with a classmate.
Kathleen Brumm Davenport, Columbus Academy class of 2001, is the Senior Director of New Product Placement at Surface Oncology, where she leads commercial strategy and planning for all clinical stage assets and contributes to corporate development. Prior to joining Surface, Kathleen held leadership roles in new product planning at Discerna Pharmaceuticals and Tesaro, where she supported commercial assessment, strategy, and disease indication prioritization across multiple therapeutic areas, including rare and common diseases. She holds a Ph.D. from the University of California, San Diego, and San Diego State University, and a BA from Boston College. She lives outside Boston with her husband and son. And finally, Vince Panzano, class of 2000, is the Senior Manager in Scientific and Competitive Analysis with Takeda Oncology, where he is responsible for tracking changes to the therapeutic landscape across a number of solid and hematological malignancies, including colorectal cancer, lung cancer, lymphoma, leukemia, and others. Prior to Takeda, Vince was with DRG Consulting, where he led pharmaceutical and biotech client engagements focused on rare diseases and implemented projects spanning epidemiology, competitive intelligence, and primary market research. Before DRG, Vince held positions with Allurion Technologies alongside Sammy and the Harvard School of Public Health. Vince earned his BA from Yale in cognitive science and completed his PhD in neuroscience at Brandeis University, where his research was focused on models of pain in fruit flies. Please welcome all of our panelists to the front row.
Thank you so much, Michael. As I said, very, very impressive panel tonight. So we're going to start off with the easy question. What's your CA graduation year, your favorite memory from your time here, and I'm going to ask for your origin story, how you got into science and technology.
So I was the Columbus Academy class of 2001. It's hard to choose just one favorite memory, but I think definitely I would say crossing the finish line of cross-country races during my senior year. I was really not very good at cross-country, but I remember even if I finished like second to last, my mom was always there wishing me on, and definitely that's a good memory. And then was the my origin story. So,
Into science and technology.
okay, so I studied biophysics and biochemistry at Yale. I was a Fulbright scholar at the Pasteur Institute, where I did basic science research, primarily in RNA and in structural biology. And then I kind of did business for a couple years before going to Harvard Medical School. I thought, like my old friend Vamsi, I would be a medical oncologist. But in the end, I started a medical device company that Vince played an incredibly important role in. And that company, Allurion Technologies, this year we're going to do about $100 million of revenue. We sell our product in 60 countries. We have about 400 employees now. And we announced that we're going to take the company public on the New York Stock Exchange, hopefully before the summer. And I now run a private equity firm that I founded called Luxera Capital Partners. We have an office in Paris and an office in San Francisco. We invest in health technology businesses. We do both growth and growth buyouts. And I'm on the board now of 6 companies, one in Germany, one in Denmark, and soon hopefully we're making an investment in the UK, and then I'm also on the board of a few companies in the US.
It's a tough act to follow. So I'm Kathleen Davenport, previously Brumm. I graduated in 2001. It's really hard to pick a favorite memory, but I'd say I have a lot of fond memories of being in the theater. I worked backstage, that's where I met Patty, and had a really amazing time there with a lot of friends. So I graduated from Academy, did my bachelor's at Boston College, spent a year living here and working at Ohio State, and then went to do my Ph.D. So I did my Ph.D. in cognitive neuroscience, working with individuals who've experienced a stroke and understanding what happens in the brain and how does the brain, how does neuroplasticity work, how does the brain reorganize after a stroke. Realized that I liked talking about science and being around science, but not actually being on the front lines of doing science. And so I transitioned into consulting when I graduated with my doctorate. Moved back to Boston, and then I did consulting, I did some market research, and then transitioned into biotech companies where I've been for about 8 years now, and leading commercial assessment and product planning at this point.
Favorite memory. So we were walking around and a couple came back to me. So I'll tell 2. One, I remember lifting weights in the barn that used to be the weight room. And I remember there was this neck machine that we were saying must have come from Soviet Russia. And I've never seen that type of machine again in my entire life. So that came back to me. I remember pushing my head into it. Another memory that came back to me, I remember, unlike Sammy, my trajectory with languages was not nearly as successful. And I think partly it was because when I should have been in Spanish class, I was playing Nintendo 64 in the yearbook office. And all I remember from Spanish is lo siento, which means I'm sorry. My arc, Mr. Davis was an important influence on me in my scientific career. Mr. Warren in math, Mrs. Hawk in physics. I just was a nerdy guy, liked science. I let Mr. Exline down. I wasn't a very good history student. I always just had an interest and love of science. And so at Yale, I did cognitive science. I focused on artificial intelligence before it was either effective or sexy. But I did computer science mostly, trying to understand how the mind works. I was always interested in how we think and where minds come from. And so I kind of pursued that passion to understand how thinking occurs at Yale, focusing on cognitive science. I had a random job after college for a couple of years and then decided I wanted to try to go back to understanding how the brain functions, but this time from a biological perspective. And so I had the great opportunity to go to Brandeis for my PhD. I worked in the fruit fly lab and we studied models of pain and chemical sensing. And similar to Sammy's remarks about the kind of cross-functional and interdisciplinary environment of Academy, a fruit fly lab was just this wonderful opportunity to use all kinds of different modalities in science. I was able to learn genetics, molecular biology, physiology, behavior. So just a wonderful experience in basic science. I actually really liked doing basic lab work. I think of that random job after undergrad made me appreciate the science camp. That was my PhD. After my PhD, I had this note. I was trying to find a job as my PhD was coming. I had this note on Facebook from Sandy saying, "Hey, you want to join the company?" I said, "Sure." So little did I know, I was going to be the fourth employee, and Sammy and I worked very closely together to build Alumni. I was there for 5 years, and then Sammy fired me. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I then went on to a consulting firm, similar background. Actually, we helped pharma kind of evaluate new areas. We call opportunity assessments, so I got to do a lot of gene therapy and learn a lot of therapy areas there. And now I'm at Takeda in oncology and commercial role, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that here.
Wonderful, thank you guys. So, and this is a little bit of interest to me, what is the biggest hurdle to getting any technology into the market? You all have touched it, done it yourselves, work on it now, so yeah, and please answer in any order.
I thought about that. I would just say the complexity in biotech is enormous. The trope of it's not rocket science, I think should be recast as it's not biotech and pharma. It's probably the most heavily regulated industry in the world, and it involves extremely complex science. And so to take those two things together and push it through from idea to clinical study to marketplace, and then go through this convoluted rat's nest of reimbursement and insurance, it's just the most complicated area in the world. So I would just say the true complexity of it and all the moving pieces is an incredible barrier.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also add that I've worked at a lot of companies where there are so many good ideas, and part of the challenge is deciding what not to do, deciding what to focus on with your resources, because you can't pursue everything, and that's a large part of my job is deciding which of your favorite children to throw away. So that but you've got to make those tough choices, right? And you've got to be able to see into the future by a decade or more. What is the marketplace going to look like? What drugs are going to be available? How will this particular disease be treated in the future? And is what we're making going to help patients in the long run? So deciding, maybe that this is really amazing science, it seems really cool, but maybe isn't going to be the most valuable thing for patients down the road, and so we should put it on the sidelines and pursue something else. And it can be challenging.
I live in a slightly different world than Kathleen and Vince, in that they focus on therapeutics, and I focus more on medical devices, diagnostics, healthcare software, research tools. And I would say that in our sectors, reimbursement is clearly the biggest challenge. I think there's a lot of people that develop exceptional technology, but if there's no way for that innovation to be paid for, and there's no business model that makes sense, companies fail.
I'm actually going to go a little bit onto that from what Sam was talking about. So, as venture funding has gotten tighter in the recent years, how do you see science and innovation driving funding decisions, and vice versa? How do funding decisions drive science and innovation and research?
So if you look at the numbers, certainly venture funding is substantially off, around 30% off of 2021 highs. I don't think it's a nuclear winter, and I'm relatively confident that we're going to avoid that, just because of the incredible amount of dry powder that exists in life sciences and in health and private equity. I would say in this environment, everyone has to be more capital efficient and use resources in a wiser way. It's more, I would say, of a return to normal than a kind of crazy, which is I think what the world was experiencing for the last couple of years. And I think at the end of the day, I'm again kind of putting on my therapeutics hat. It is the great science that ends up succeeding, and so I think we're in an environment where maybe the bar is a little bit higher for funding innovation, and the quality of science I think is driving investment decisions from institutions for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when Mandy sent this question, it reminded me there was a phrase that I did not make up, but someone else made up. So, in pharmaceuticals, we talk about our pipeline of drugs. And a few years ago, someone coined the term pipeline for products. Companies would put up a pipeline of preclinical, only experiments in lab, never been tested in humans, and they have a long suite and raise significant amount of capital on that with these relatively untested therapeutics. And so, I think, and Sammy, I totally agree with your point, but I think we're getting more to the point where investors are looking for, it's a great story, but show me some data, right? When you come back, when you're able to show that there's really a therapeutic benefit in patients. And I think the best ideas will win out, but I think at the same time, you've got to make tough choices. My company just deprioritized a program that was having clinical benefit in patients, but not great enough to move it forward, right? Not enough to say that this is something worth investing in, so we need to put our resources elsewhere.
Yeah, so what's really tricky in biotech in particular is you don't know what will work in advance until you start trying it in people. So you might have a good theory, and you got to start to put it to the test. But what's tricky, I think, is when there's a lot of funding, you can take more risks. But when there's less funding, you don't have the opportunity to try things that you might otherwise try. And the thing that's very challenging is that you don't necessarily know what will be a winner until you try. So you're trying to make this prediction of like what will be commercially viable, what will make us money. But if you were also to find the next big thing that would be the new standard of care, it wouldn't matter if it's in an area necessarily that is a huge opportunity if you can then become the only therapy that's used. So it's a very difficult decision. But what's really nice is that as venture funding increases, you just get the opportunity to take more risks, the industry does, and from those risks you can see really transformative therapies come through. I think when there's less funding, the industry becomes generally more conservative, and we may cull programs too soon before they've had a chance to be tested. But in biotech, what is it? I think 1 out of 10 programs is going to fail, essentially. And even the ones that fail may not be blockbusters. But you got to try those 10 before you find one that could ultimately work.
I'll just speak loudly. Put on the swim coach voice. So we're going to change tracks a little bit. I'm going to ask, Sammy answered this one in his wonderful remarks, but for Vince and Kathleen, what had the greatest impact on you from your time at CA, be it a teacher, a friend, an activity, a class? What is it that you still pops into your mind to this day from time to time?
It's all the people, all of the experiences. I can't really put a finger on one. I had supportive parents as well, and I think they gave me this opportunity to come, so I think it's really my parents who I give most of the credit. But the community, the opportunities, the quality of the faculty, the friends, it's just a very rich environment, an enriched environment. So I can't point to one thing, it's all of it.
Yeah, I think I would say I joined Academy in the middle of my 10th grade year. I think I started in February, and that was a really tough transition, as you can imagine. The quality of the people here, I came from a school where it was a private school in another state. I was always very, head down academics. I think what Academy contributed was, and you mentioned this in your comments, Sammy, was the investment and the interaction between faculty and students. That I really knew that faculty cared for me as a person, and Mrs. Hogan is here. She connected with me early on. I knew that I had that connection. I did things beyond the classroom and really building out sort of that whole person attribute. And I think just taking risks, right, beyond the classroom, doing things that I wasn't, I'd never done theater before. I had never run a spotlight or run the soundboard. And, just having that opportunity to try new things was transformative.
Thanks. So kind of going along with that, and this is actually inspired by an answer Sammy gave yesterday when we talked to some of the upper school students. How has your definition of success changed since you were a high school senior? Sammy, do you want to start since you already kind of have an answer? Here, Sammy.
Well, it's not all about me anymore. One thing your comments about passion, the ambition, I would call it a passion. I think that has remained the same. One thing was nice about Academy is I felt like you could pursue passions, be it art. I saw Mr. Block. That was a passion of mine. And science. You get exposed to all these different classes, and you had some choice and agency to pick the classes that really spoke to you, and then invest in those. So I think my motivation on that point hasn't changed, because my arc of choosing what I did in college wasn't necessarily about what I would do with it later. It was driven by passion, and then my Ph.D. interest and passion, joining a Learn On, an amazing idea with talented, smart people. So that too, I was kind of motivated by something new and cool and fun. And that's what I continue to do. So I think that hasn't changed. I won't talk about what has changed. But also just getting older, having family, and you start to do things for other people, which is healthy.
I'm curious what Sammy's answer was.
What I said was, I referred to it a little bit in my remarks earlier. I think there's a lot of, there's a sort of a very, I would say, traditional view of what success looks like, and I think people think about professional success, and we don't talk a lot about failure in school, which I think is just an absolutely critical function. You can't succeed without failing a lot and kind of getting up off the ground and having grit and keeping pushing forward and trying to live out your dreams. But I think as I've grown up and become an adult, I think what I've discovered is that there's so many different flavors of success that are just different than the traditional success that people think about, and people find happiness and satisfaction in a lot of different ways than just being a doctor or a lawyer or having a kind of conventional success, and there's not one recipe. When I think about my kids and what I want for them, I think I'm probably the 40-year-old version of myself is maybe more open-minded about what success could look like for them than maybe the 14-year-old version of myself when I showed up at this institution.
I think the only thing I would say also is that I was very, academically driven, and I always wanted to do the best for myself. And I now say, I work in drug development. Drug development is a team sport. Nothing gets done based on one individual or even 5 individuals. It's a team sport, and I've just worked on so many incredible teams with just absolutely stellar people, and it's just so satisfying to see people coming together with. I think the other thing that has been remarkable is just seeing people's passion for bringing new therapies to patients who have tremendous needs for medicines that will help them live longer or live better lives. And so, having that team environment and seeing things succeed together, where that it's not just one person's role, has been really meaningful.
Great, thank you guys. So what is a trend or a new technology in your field that you're keeping an eye on and kind of excited about?
So
that you can talk about, that you're not under any disclosure.
Yeah. So at my firm, we're really big believers in the future of complex biologic drugs. So if you look 10 years ago, roughly 30% of FDA approvals were complex biologics, 70% were small molecules. If you look today, about 60 to 70% of clinical trial starts are complex biologics. And what's interesting is if you're making a small molecule, there's pennies of value in the production process, but for complex biologics like cell therapy and even antibody drug conjugates, you name it, there's tens of thousands of dollars of value in the manufacturing. And so we're spending a lot of our time looking at opportunities investing in picks and shovels, complex biologics manufacturing. So we just acquired a company in the middle of nowhere in France that makes bioseparation technology for the kind of last step of manufacturing, really for any complex biologic. And we're under exclusivity to invest in a business that makes extracellular membrane proteins to differentiate stem cell therapeutics. And so we're any kind of opportunity for high quality, high gross margin businesses and complex biologics is of interest to us.
So I don't have the same molecular background that this gentleman do, but I previously worked at a company that did RNA interference technology, and it was really fascinating during the pandemic. Moderna became a household name. Where I live, Moderna was this quirky company that like nobody, either you loved it or you hated it when you went to work there, and so it's just been interesting to see the rise of RNA and the rise of this new technology that now everybody in the world knows, at least has heard of what RNA is, whether you know what it is or not. The company that I was working at is working to do sort of short-lived gene therapies. So they're not permanent gene therapies, but they can work on rare genetic diseases and things like things you've never heard of, but bringing changes to protein expression in the body. So anyway, I'm really fascinated to see the rise of the new technologies, and it's kind of nice that now at least people have some semblance of knowledge of what it is.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned the complex therapeutics, because I would say what interests me is actually that some of the therapies, like the CAR T cell therapies, are extremely complicated to manufacture. Just briefly, these CAR T therapies are essentially engineered cells, engineered immune cells that are, for most people, taken out of the patient, engineered, and then put back in to fight cancer. So it's these CAR T cells. There are enormous challenges to quality, manufacturing, reimbursement, efficacy for cell therapies. Biotech and pharma went through a phase where CAR T therapy was all the rage, and a lot of biotechs emerged because of that craze. But because of the barriers, many have failed. And in fact, there's been an emergence of a new class of therapeutic, which is called a bispecific antibody, which I think threatens CAR Ts generally. And what a bispecific antibody is, and try to make it simple, is it's essentially one antibody that targets something on the cancer cell, and it has another tail that targets your own immune system. And it essentially pulls your own immune system cells to the cancer. So it's sort of a linker that links your own T cells, your own immune cells, and brings it to the cancer cell. The CAR T cell is essentially a T cell manufactured to attack the cancer, but the bispecifics essentially are a bridge between the existing T cells and the cancer. We've seen some amazing data from bispecifics in certain heme malignancies, like DLBCL, and so I think the bispecifics are potentially going to nullify a lot of the cell therapies unless the cell therapies can really go down in cost and increase in efficacy. So bispecifics are something I'm very excited about.
Awesome, thank you guys. So what is one piece of practical advice you would give to somebody that has an innovation or an invention or a patent that they have that they want to commercialize? That's the big jump, is I have this, now how do I go out and convince people I can make money with it? What is a piece of advice you would give them as they start thinking about this?
Are we talking about in bio?
In anything. But if you want to focus on biotech, go for it.
Yeah, I would say because of the complexity required, it's going to be hard to do it alone, the team sport idea. But beyond that, you're going to need enormous amounts of capital to make it real. And so I think as early as you can, you're going to need to partner with either big pharma or you're going to have to get funding from somewhere. And it has to be an enormous amount of funding to bring it to market. So I think there's some differences between, say, like therapeutics and diagnostics. There may be some opportunity, though, in the RNA technology or the gene therapies where it's more of like just information technology embodied in a therapeutic. So maybe there's more opportunity for entry there. But generally, these are enormous efforts that require incredible amounts of capital. So you have to find a partner with money.
That is straightforward.
And maybe slightly more like general entrepreneurial advice. I think that you need to, I would say 3 critical things. One, you need to work on an opportunity where if you're successful, it has a big impact and it creates a lot of value. So I think execution to succeed in small things is as hard in many cases execution to succeed in big things. And it's going to take 10 or 15 years of your life to really build something meaningful in most cases. And so better to spend that time on something that if it can be a success has a big impact. I would say the second thing is surround yourself with exceptional people that have diverse skill sets and together you're better. Not only exceptional in terms of business talent or scientific talent, but I would also say in terms of values, because it's easy when everything's going well, and it's really hard when things aren't going well. And that's why being able to build a learning on with Vince was such an awesome experience, because there were a lot of times that were really hard, I mean, let's be honest. But I think when you're working with people that have good values and think about patients first and respond to adversity in a positive way, it's a heck of a lot easier. And then I would say the third thing is, and maybe one kind of comment for general education. In my education, I don't think I learned early enough that failure is normal and a part of, like I said earlier, a part of success. And I think grit is the real critical attribute for me more than anything else to be successful in entrepreneurship, because in medical device development, I like to tell people that it's like a decade of suffering punctuated by brief moments of happiness and satisfaction. But most of the time, you're just petrified that you're going to kill people with this thing, and it's going to be a total disaster. And dealing with the complexities of having to raise money when things are going poorly, and just the stress of it it's consuming. And so I wonder what we can do in education to teach kids at a young age that that failure is okay. And Thomas Edison took how many light bulb designs before the light bulb worked. I think that's the reality of making anything a success. And so grit, being able, no matter how tough it is, being able to kind of be hit by a 2x4, get up off the ground when you're bleeding, put a smile on your face, and try to inspire people to go do great things. I think that's what it takes to be successful. So anyways.
On the topic of failure, who do you guys turn to, or what do you think about to get yourself through those difficult moments where everything feels like it's going wrong?
Okay. Two things. So during the pandemic, I formed a group. I was invited into a group of women who all do a similar role as I do in the Boston area. And we started meeting virtually over Zoom, and now we've met. We made our own retreat and went and talked about work and life, and just having people who are women who walk in the same shoes as I do has been extremely helpful. They've become really dear friends. And I mean, the other thing is my family. Right? I've got similar to these guys, very supportive parents. My husband is such a cheerleader. He keeps telling me he can't wait for me to get a C-suite role so he can be a house husband. So we're hoping for that day. But yeah, and I also, have been pretty intentional about both being mentored and being a mentor myself. And I've actually gotten a lot more out of being a mentor than being mentored, and learning more from people who are coming up, who are more junior. It's been just really I will sometimes have that same feeling of being kicked and being down, and a lot of times people who are more junior have still that sense of inspiration and hopefulness that kind of reinvigorates. So that's been really great.
Well, when things get tough, I remember that neck machine. I'm only half joking. I mean, I wrestled. It was a very important part of my life at Academy, was being on the wrestling team. In fact, when I came back to campus, I went to the wrestling room and it was locked. But for me, it's hard to. I don't know. It's hard to worry too much when you've felt someone try to crush your face. So I think that's part of the education. here is actually the sports and the different things you can do. It adds a lot to your character beyond just the academics. And so that's one thing, to kind of turn to that. I think the question was sort of two parts. Things that are tough, but also where do you turn?
Where do you turn for advice in general?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to mention AI, but what I will mention is that we do live in a time where all of human knowledge and understanding is at your fingertips, and it's only going to become more so. So in my job in competitive intelligence, I'm on the internet all the time, and I'm also on databases that essentially distill key information. So information is going to play a critical role in every industry going forward, and the ability to leverage that information and access it. It's not going to be about knowing the information, it's going to be about understanding what's important information and then leveraging it. So when I have a question, I turn to the internet, or I turn to these databases that are at my disposal to try to answer the question with data. And then I also turn to my wife for support. She's much tougher than I am because she was a swimmer, not a wrestler. And swimming makes you real tough.
I would say that I draw tremendous strength from my family. And I remember when we were running a clinical trial at Lurion a few years ago, every morning I would wake up, and since we live in a different time zone, I would go to sleep kind of during the day in the US and wake up with tons of emails and messages. And sometimes those messages had positive news, and often they had negative news. And I remember basically telling myself before reading those messages every morning, it's going to be okay. My family loves me. I love my family. We're healthy. Whatever has happened, it's going to be fine. And kind of the positive thinking and I think helps when challenging or devastating news is shared, being able to find strength and support from other important parts of life. I think having kids too radically changed the stress level that I felt at work because they seem so important, and it's just hard to be as stressed out about something that's business related, versus just watching your kids grow up and feeling the importance of what you're trying to transmit to them in terms of values.
Oh, wonderful. So we will wrap up with a CA-related question. So when you describe your academy experience to friends or colleagues, or when you were telling people what you were going to come back to and what CA was, what is one word or a short description that kind of your elevator pitch for what academy was to you and why you were willing to come back and speak on this panel?
I think one word that comes to mind, it's maybe a weird word, but the word is nice. And the reason I say that is being back here, being in Central Ohio, just compared to like our day-to-day life in Paris, in big cities where it's more, you're like every day you wake up and you're interacting with angry, frustrated people. Just like a knife fight to go buy a metro ticket. It's great being in Central Ohio where people are friendly and warm and kind. And so nice is my word.
I have a similar one, which is welcoming. As I said, I joined in the middle of the high school experience, and everyone here was always very welcoming. And coming back, right? It's been, I've gotten hugs, and I haven't been here in 15 years or more, and it's like I never left, although I have a few more wrinkles.
Yeah, it was similar. The word that came to my mind was supportive, very supportive community. And sometimes I feel like I didn't deserve it, but everyone was very supportive of me, and just felt like you could come here and be yourself and do things that you were interested in without, fear. So it was a very supportive environment for me.
There's no fear until you had to face down the neck machine, and then lots and lots of fear.
That was more of a masochism.
I also have very clear memories of the neck machine in the weight room barn too, so I think it's like junior speeches, and the fact that the stairwells are still the same is a thing that ties us all together.
Put that in like a glass case or something.
Yeah. You can go find it wherever it ended up. That concludes our panel tonight, and I really want to thank all of our panelists for coming from around the world to be here this evening and share their thoughts with all of you. And I want to thank all of you guys for coming back to our first in-person event for the Young Alumni Networking and Awards Ceremony. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope you guys had a wonderful time reconnecting with classmates and faculty members and parents. And again, I just really appreciate everybody coming out and participating tonight. So thank you all very much.